the painting that, or the artist that we're going to be looking at today is Gustave Caillebotte. And I'm going to be looking at the way in which he represents modernity, or the way in which he represents the new city. Now, the paintings that we've been looking at over the last, just a minute, I'm trying to hide. The paintings that we've been looking at over the last week have been that of Marie Antoinette and of Napoleon. So what do we have in this first painting that is going to be so very different from the paintings that we're looking at today? Well, firstly, we have a very identifiable person in the center with her children. She is in a very stable spatial situation. She's in this sort of pyramid style structure. She is very much located in a historical, recognizable position. We have the Hall of Mirrors behind her. We have a series of symbols that we looked at before, such as the fleur de lis, referring to the fact that she's a Bourbon. The painting was, of course, commissioned by the royal family, and it was commissioned to tell a story, to create a narrative. And the narrative that was to be told was that Marie Antoinette was a good queen. She knew how to act her role as mother of the next generation. It's an image which is supposed to refer to the past and indeed is frozen in time. The next image that we looked at last week was that of the crowning of Josephine and the consecration of Napoleon. Once again, it is commissioned as a propaganda piece, this time by Napoleon himself. It is in a very recognizable setting. Again, not just anywhere. It is Notre Dame, just as Marie Antoinette was situated again in one of the great places of Paris, Versailles. This painting here, again, has a very, very formal structure leading to the central protagonist, who is Napoleon. We have a series of portraits, and it's anchored very clearly in time and space. Time exactly to the day and the hour when a new dynasty was supposed to take place. This is very different then from the painting that we're going to look at today. And this is Paris on a rainy day. Now, this then is a streetscape. It is, having gone from the highly formal, wondrous settings of Versailles and Notre Dame, we are now presented with an utterly banal street setting, and it could be any street at all in Paris. It is identifiably Paris, as we'll see in a moment, because of the architecture, but apart from that, the people here are completely unknown. They could be anybody. The importance of this painting is that it is really a painting about the city. It's not anchored either in time, particularly. People are moving about, and the spatial construction also is rather odd. We have these people on the right-hand side coming straight at us, and the people on the left-hand side moving in a completely different direction. So there is no static one great moment which is being portrayed. It's a cityscape which is ambiguous and rather difficult to read, in fact, very difficult to read. But all of these paintings share one thing in common. They are very large. The painting of Marie Antoinette was life-size. The painting of the Sacre was enormous. In other words, and this painting here also has the size of a history painting. So in other words, what is happening in the time of the Second Empire is that you have these paintings of an anonymous street scene with anonymous people now elevated to the level of history painting, the highest level of painting, which originally was to create a message, to be elevating, to make you more virtuous when you have read it, and so on. So what actually is going on here? Well, I want to have a look at a poem by Charles Baudelaire, who was writing his Flowers of Evil, Les Fleurs du Mal, in 1857, which is the time frame, as we will see, of the Second Empire. He is writing about change, about this poor swan who's found itself out, broken out of its cage and is fluffing around in the dust outside the Louvre, which is being reconstructed, and all of the boulevards of Haussmannian Paris are being reconstructed. And so he's the swan is as out of place as the poet. And the poet says, Paris changes, but naught in my melancholy has stirred. New places, scaffolding, blocks of stone, old quarters, all become for me an allegory, and my dear memories are heavier than rocks. So what you have here is the essential experience of the city. And indeed, this is what is going to be portrayed in these paintings by Caillebotte. And what is this that's being shown? It's change. The new city is one of flux, of ephemeral meetings, of ambiguous situations, of movement. And it's change, but Baudelaire sees it as a negative change. It's melancholy and it's alienating. And his inner self echoes the distraction of the familiar city, the old way of seeing things. Now, Baudelaire also wrote a poem to a woman, a passante, and I think I want to stress that there's a big difference here between a Flâneur, whom we're going to introduce very soon, who is a man, and a woman who is walking along the street, who does not have the same qualities as a Flâneur. She's just someone who passes by, because she has a very ambiguous status, as you'll see. I'm not going to dwell on the interpretation of this poem. I just want to pick out certain elements to emphasize the way in which these new paintings of the city emphasize the psychological encounter between the viewer and the new city. The street about me roared with a deafening sound. Tall, slender, in heavy mourning, majestic grief, a woman passed with a glittering hand, raising, swinging the hem of the flounces of her skirt, agile and graceful, her leg like a statue's. Well, already you have this idea of the street as being an alien space. It's invading the poet with a deafening sound. And then there's this strange sort of phenomenon of this woman who walks past, who looks beautiful, but she is a very ambiguous presence. What's a woman doing there by herself, particularly raising, swinging the hem of her skirt and showing her leg? Now, no really respectable woman would be doing something like that. Now, we get the encounter with the poet tense as in a delirium. So in other words, this is, it's all going so fast, it's like a delirium. I drank from her eyes, pale sky where tempests germinate, the sweetness that enthralls and the pleasure that kills. So immediately he enters into a kind of ephemeral, evanescent relationship with this person as they pass by and their eyes meet. A lightning flash, then night. All right, so this is what the city's like. You meet at these encounters which you weren't expecting and which you can't even look back on. It suddenly happens and then it suddenly disappears. There is no sense of permanence, as we saw in those original paintings that we've been looking at so far. Fleeting, all right, the idea of movement, the idea of something going quickly. Fleeting beauty, by whose glance I was suddenly reborn. This is just, amazing stimulus of the city. Will I see you no more before eternity? So this is now looking at the time frame. Elsewhere, looking now at the spatial frame. Elsewhere, far, far from here. And now the time frame, too late, never perhaps. All right, so in other words, the way in which we normally experience reality has been changed forever. For I know not where you fled, all right? I have no idea who you are. You don't know where I go. You know not where I go. Oh, you whom I would have loved, oh, you who knew it. So there's this sudden complicity of these meeting glances, which then quickly evaporate and whiz incredibly quickly off again. So this really is in many ways the sort of image of encounters in the city, ambiguous, ambivalent, and completely different from the normal experience that one would have had before. This is the essence of modernity. Now, the person who epitomizes this way of viewing the city is the flâneur. The flâneur, it comes from the word flâner, meaning to stroll, but our English doesn't really encapsulate the idea of flâner. Strolling makes it sound as though it's sort of rather lazy and laid back. In fact, actually, the flâneur was a man of leisure who had the means not to have to work and so could walk through the city, but he's walking through with great purpose. He's flâning, or if you could, strolling, with the purpose of gleaning the images of the new city, the sounds of the city, the way in which it feels to encounter the city. And he will either translate these into words or into paintings or into witty chit-chat in the cafes that he will frequent. So here we have a painting of a flâneur, a typical flâneur, by Caillebotte. We have, he's obviously a man of the middle classes, and in particular, he is a man. As I said before, a woman cannot be a flâneur. There is no such thing as a flâneuse. Now, Caillebotte, as we'll see, was a member of the Impressionist movement, a key member. And I just want to look very briefly at how the other Impressionists show this encounter with modernity, the idea of the changing moment, the fleetingness of experience. Now, Monet, in particular, is going to do this by showing how light changes the images that we think are permanent, such as something as solid as Santa Maria della Salute dissolves under different types of light. All right, so this is this impermanence of interaction with the world via light. He's sort of showing it from a scientific point of view. Now, the same sort of evanescent experiences are also brought to light by Renoir in his group paintings, if you want, of people, the sort of encounters, frivolous, sensual encounters of the moment, people seizing the moment to enjoy and have some form of pleasure. So these are two different ways of, I suppose, exploring what modernity was like. Now, Caillebotte, I want to look at much more in detail later, has only really lately become more of an emphasis in the art world. He was always known as really the person who donated the largest number of works of art to the state, or to the city of Paris. He made a will when he was 25. He had a premonition that he was going to die young, and he did when he was 45. And he'd already produced or developed a large collection of the paintings of his fellow Impressionists. He'd done this because he came from a wealthy background, and he supported Pissarro, Renoir, and Monet substantially. You can see very large loans, about 10,000 francs and so on, and even sort of supports Monet by paying the rent for a little apartment near the Gare Saint-Lazare so he can develop those beautiful paintings that we know of that station. Caillebotte also, as he was wealthy, did not have to sell his paintings, and in fact didn't want to. And when he died, most of them went into his family collection. And so they were never sort of put onto the market by the agents who were the great sellers and promoters of the Impressionists. For example, Durand, who will promote the Impressionists in America. And so when we thought about Impressionism, there tends to be this emphasis on Monet in particular and Renoir, mainly because they produced so many works, were taken up by the Americans, but also because Caillebotte just wasn't in that group. So it's only when the family began to release some of his works onto the market that he started to be of interest. And so now he is known not just as the benefactor of the Impressions, or the great gift man who gave, philanthropist who gave these works to Paris, but also as a very interesting painter in his own right. And that's what I want to look at today. Now, his paintings are those of the experience of the city, of the psychological experience of the city, and of the dominance of the middle classes, the rise of the bourgeoisie. And I think this is a very good example of how he is showing how the people themselves are dominated by the city. There are these open, anonymous spaces with people drifting aimlessly, almost like ants, in one way and another across these new spaces, which in many ways are quite alienating. He also does a great number of paintings of isolated figures, when it's not streetscapes of figures that look isolated, it's single figures who are isolated. This is his brother René, who is looking out at this new Haussmannian cityscape. Now, I want to very quickly go through, look at the Paris of the Second Empire. What was this Paris that was being produced? And I know many of you have sat through a lot of these lectures with me, so this will be something that you can sort of, think, oh, yes, I've done that, been there and done that. In fact, a lot of you have with my tours. The Paris of the Second Empire develops under the Emperor Napoleon III. Now, I just want to very quickly sort of situate this so that it relates very much to what we've been looking at. The French Revolution takes place, and you have Napoleon coming in with the consulate. He then crowns himself in 1804 as emperor. This ends, of course, at Waterloo in 1815. Then we have the restoration of the Bourbon. You will notice here that they haven't mentioned Charles X, which should have been, there were two Bourbon kings. You then have the monarchy of July, which is the Orléanais, which we haven't treated. You have the Second Republic. This is when Napoleon III comes in as president. He then, by a plebiscite, which is rigged, has himself nominated as emperor. And this is the Second Empire, which lasts from 1852 to 1870 and ends with the Franco-Prussian War. And after the bloody outbreak of the Commune, which is another, revolution, you then have the Third Republic coming into play. This is really the Belle Epoque. So I just thought that was quite useful to situate it. Well, Napoleon III has spent most of his life in exile, and has identified that it's Paris which is the problem, really, insofar as it is very open by its structure to revolutions and uprisings, which are very, very difficult to put down. You had the French Revolution, you had the Revolution of 1830, you had the Revolution of 1848, where he came to power. And so he is determined not to have this happen, and he comes over, brings in Baron Haussmann, who is instructed to reconstruct the city. Now, this is a massive, massive undertaking that had not happened anywhere else in the world. Now, Paris at the time was really basically a medieval city. Here you have photographs which were taken by Marville. Now, he was commissioned by Haussmann to photograph all of the streets that were going to be demolished. So it was a very sort of scientifically based idea. And so if you actually want to see what these streets look like, you can actually go. I've got a book of the photographs actually. You can see there are no footpaths. It's dark, it's cold, it's dirty, the sun doesn't get in. There's no refuse was thrown out into the streets. There's no drains and so on. So this was the city, which was a dangerous city, where uprisings could happen. Here are barricades. Here you actually have this 1830 picture of people on the barricades right in the centre near Notre Dame. And this is a daguerreotype of what these barricades look like. So in other words, in the tiny streets, it was very easy to throw up a few mattresses, and then it would be impossible for troops to get down. They'd be shot at from windows. And also they were nesting places of groups of people who were tightly knit. So by destroying these alleyways, you not only destroyed the environment and made it more open to political intervention or military intervention, but you've also got rid of those networks that tied these people together and tied them in revolutionary bonds. And these people would be dispersed to the outer parts of Paris, where all of their bonds would break up and they would no longer have any sort of political power. So this is when Paris then goes through its real reconstruction. This goes on for years and years and years. You can see it was a massive undertaking. Napoleon III wanted a Paris which was legible, a Paris which was coherent. This is the Avenue de l'Opéra. You can see how you have all of these structures of buildings, which are, triangular shapes. But all of these boulevards actually had a focal point, and the focal point here, of course, was the centre, which was the opera. Now, all of these streets had some kind of focal point. So, in other words, while you're in the centre of Paris, you looked around, you could see where you were. So, you were very much, how could I say it, not encircled by the city, but the city dominates you in many ways. So this is the network, extraordinary network, which is built up of boulevards by Haussmann, and he sort of linked them all up so that you've actually got barracks here where you could disperse troops in straight lines. And of course, with straight lines, you can fire a cannon, and you can also have cavalry charges, the sort of thing we actually need in Melbourne at the moment. Now, what we have here then is these going from darkness, and by the way, just try and remember these cobblestones. You go from darkness and stillness. There is nothing happening here. This is mainly because the exposures actually took some time, and so things that moved actually wouldn't come up on the frame. However, it is a kind of ghostly landscape, whereas now what you have is light and movement, and movement and light were identified with life, and stillness and darkness with death. So this is the living city. And you also, of course, have the infrastructure that goes with this. And this infrastructure is very important in relation to the paintings. I won't go into this in great detail because I'm already running out of time, but we have these buildings that go off into into infinity, and they're all the same. They're all 5 stories high with the same roofs made of the same material, with balconies at the same level, with trees at the same level, at the same height according to the width of the street. I mean, everything is a very planned geometrical environment. You have the new city, which is built of bridges, and the new city of railways, which are the new cathedrals of light, with now you have metal which is being manufactured and large pieces of glass, and so you don't need cathedrals anymore. You have the structures. It's also built, the city is also built very much on this idea of the city as a human body, where you have movement going along the arteries, and you get that, you know, nowadays, if you turn on the wireless, they sort of say, or the radio, they say, oh yes, you know, some of the main arteries have been blocked, you know, we use medical vocabulary to sort of talk about traffic. And in fact, the French word for traffic is circulation, circulation. You know, it's this idea of movement and vitality, which is what the city should be. You also need lungs, and this is where you actually have the city. He incorporates, Haussmann and Napoleon III incorporate these which are outside the city. These around here, you actually have these arrondissements, which we incorporated into Paris, so that he can incorporate woods and parks and gardens, which he'd seen very much in London. These were the lungs. And then, of course, the innovation is that of the sewers, which were the intestines, and you get rid of the dreadful miasmas and smells by covering over these little rivers which ran through the centre of Paris. And this is where people used to dump sort of dead, you know, the bodies from the abattoirs. Here you can see these people sort of dying, putting dye into the waters and so on. So in other words, it's the hygienic city which we're going to see. And this, very briefly, is going to be a city which is dominated now by the captains of industry, by bankers, by people who've made money, not people who have been born with money. It doesn't matter who you were born, it's what you become, which I would say that is very different from the English system at that time. Even if you're a lord if you're still walking around in tatters and mentally deranged. It doesn't matter, it's your bloodline that counts. In Paris, it's very different. You have this new class who is going to dominate. They're going to live in the center, and the others are going to live on the outsides where they've been pushed. Now, very, very briefly, here you have these people who are pushed to the outskirts, the old rag picker who comes in at night and picks up, cigarette butts and hair and dead cats, and then sells the dead cats to the sort of bistros and sells the hair to wigs and so on. And he lives in these outer parts of Paris, very different, unhygienic. There's no real boulevards, there's no churches or anything out here. The center of Paris is dominated by these new bourgeois. This is Caillebotte themselves, the Caillebotte family. Caillebotte's father had inherited a business that had made a lot of money selling mattresses and materials to the army. I suppose you would have called them new rich at the time, but here they are living an incredible life. And these are the kind of mansions that they live on round the Parc Monceau. On the outer boulevards, you have people like the absinthe drinker, alone, debauched at midnight drinking absinthe. On the inner boulevards, you have, of course, women like Renoir. Renoir wouldn't be worried about these other savoury people. Here they are sort of surrounded by men, very cute looking, as always, having a drink on the inner boulevards. It's the same thing with everything. Prostitution, this is what you get if you go to the outskirts, and this is what you get if you come to the centre. These are the great courtesans who, the crowned heads of Europe come to visit. So there's a real dichotomy between these two Parises. So the Paris that we're going to look at today is the Paris of the new boulevards, the Paris of the new squares, which are round the centre and which are gradually moving out, the Paris of the 8th arrondissement going up to the 9th. Now, here you have then this Paris on a rainy day, which is divided very much by this lamppost, which we looked at, this idea of the importance of light, and divided across this way by this horizontal. So you have two elements of the new Paris, which are dividing and structuring the painting. Now, if you actually go to the Place de Dublin, this is exactly what you see. I mean, it makes me weak to the knees, where you actually can stand exactly where it was painted. And you have this Haussmannian building aggressively coming towards you. And of course, you have this marker of modernity, which was Paris being lit by night. And of course, you can tell whether it was an important place or not, whether it had 2 or 3 lamps or not. All right, so this is foregrounding very much the importance of the Haussmannian structure. The umbrellas are also quite important here because they actually reiterate the Place de Dublin was at the centre of 8 different streets, all of which had names of Europe. See, can you see Turin, St. Petersburg, Moscow, Bucharest, and so on. And so it's around this central structure, you also get the structure of the umbrella. So it's very much the city is dominating the protagonists. I just want to show you where this is. Now, Caillebotte will end up living here on the corner of the Rue Miromeni and Lisbonne. So he only has to walk a couple of blocks to go to the Gare Saint-Lazare, as we'll see, and the Pont d'Europe, and up here to the Place de Dublin. So it's about a 5, maybe a 10-minute walk. Now, let's have a look then at this particular painting. So on the left-hand side of the painting, you have smaller figures who are dominated by that building. You have the impression that, you know, look out, it's behind you. These people don't seem to have noticed that the building is going to come right at them. So you've got this very strange perspective, and perspective is everything in the paintings of Caillebotte. So they are sort of walking, they're strolling across the picture plane, very much different from the people on the right-hand side. And they're all drawn together by the fact that they have umbrellas, and they're all dressed the same. They're not, you know, they're unidentifiable, anonymous figures walking in odd directions. There's no sort of way in which you sort of feel that they're going anywhere purposely. He's just watching his feet. These people actually aren't together. They look as though they are. It's this sort of anonymous relationship of the city. Caillebotte also pulls it together and makes the whole place look more alien and threatening by the fact that you've got these cobblestones, which are sort of small geometric slabs, which come off towards us. So they're very much like those cobblestones that you saw in Marville's photographs. Now, on the right-hand side, you have different people here. You have these 2 middle-class people who are coming, or it looks as though they're coming towards us. So they're coming in a different, you've got them, those people going across, these people are coming towards us, but they're not looking towards us, they're looking away from us. Something's caught their attention over there. And this person here is coming towards them. So you get this extraordinary cropping of the picture plane. You have the impression that they're going to bump each other, and in fact that they're going to bump us, because actually this painting is so big, when you're actually standing in front of it, you feel that these people are coming out and they're going to actually hit you. So what you have here then is in many ways not just an anonymous cityscape, you know, with anonymous people, which they are anonymous, but you have these people who seem to be wandering aimlessly in a city and controlled by a city. The human element has been reduced, and the architectural Haussmannian element has been enhanced. Now, you have these people the painting is dominated by the middle class here, who seem to be coming towards us without a worry in the world, whereas the people in the background are the working class. These are the ones who are actually building, they're the ones who are actually building Paris. I wanted to actually show you this because, of course, the Impressionists were very influenced by the Japanese prints. The Japanese prints came in and show cropping from an unusual angle. You know, you don't have the sort of normal vanishing point that you do in sort of Western Renaissance art. Here, looking in from the side again. And so it's very much like photographic imagery. Now, if you look at behind this woman with her veil, You'll see a working class woman there who's getting in out of the rain. The working class, it's a much more precarious existence, not protected as they are by this man who is, looking after this woman. Here you have the workers here who are painting the new parish. You've got a worker here. You've got some workers pulling along a carriage and so on. So this then is the painting of modernity, right? A scene of anyone, it seems, in a city which is in some ways hostile and unreadable. Now, I just want to look at the painter Caillebotte himself, one of my favorites, I do have to admit. Now, Caillebotte, as I said before, came from a wealthy background. His father, Martial, had already inherited a fortune and continued, as many middle-class people did under the Second Empire, to enhance this fortune. He married, the father married the first time and had Alfred Caillebotte, who became a priest. This means he's not going to have any children. He was a brilliant scholar and rises very high in the priesthood, uses his money in philanthropic ways. He was known for giving away most of his fortune and starting up orphanages. So really a very interesting family. His father marries a second time, and Alfred's mother dies. Martial marries a second time, and that wife dies. It's starting to look a bit suspicious. He marries the third time and has 3 more boys, one of which, the eldest of which, is Gustave, and this is his younger, 5 years younger brother, Martial. In between is a brother, René, who we'll look at in a moment. Now, Martial, the 3 boys are brilliant, in particular Caillebotte, who becomes a lawyer, takes out his license. However, and also he was called up to fight in the Franco-Prussian War, but his father actually can buys his way out of that so that he doesn't have to do this, and he takes up painting. His brother studies at the conservatory and is not a great pianist, but a composer, a considerably interesting composer. So they're a very artistic family. They also together will start up an amazing stamp collection, which is now being bought by the British, and I think is in a very important British collection over there as well. Now, the father buys, with all this money, for his 4 sons, a property at Hyères, which is about 60 kilometers out of Paris. And it's not, as you can see, a little shack. It's quite a mansion out in the country. And Caillebotte grows up here, very interested in rowing and in boats, and often portrays people in different forms of boats. In fact, at the end of his life, he will be well known as an engineer and someone who designs his own boats. So someone who is very, Renaissance type man. This is a sort of slightly awkward painting where he possibly is sort of sitting almost opposite this fellow. There's an awful lot of controversy about this as to, what's actually going on here. Now he exhibits, he meets the Impressionists when he exhibits this painting, The Floor Scrapers, at this salon, or tries to have it exhibited at the salon, and it is rejected. It's rejected because it's considered, why would you be painting, working class people scraping floors? It was, and also the people were a little bit uneasy about what they thought was slightly homoerotic about the, the muscular notion of these people, which is really in many ways what the painting is about. But also you have this development, again, this use of perspective that Caillebotte is going to use taken from Renaissance art. You know, most of the other Impressionists don't use perspective, and that's one of the things that they get rid of. Whereas Caillebotte takes it and exaggerates it to look at this new Paris. So here you have these people scraping the floor from this angle. This is, of course, very much an Haussmannian building. When this is rejected, he turns to a group who are, of course, the independents, who will become the Impressionists. And from then on, he will be the major organizer of the Impressionist movements. He will organize the who shows these things. He will rent the premises. He will print the prospectuses, the programs. He will help frame and hang these things, works on the publicity, as well as exhibits his own paintings. So he's someone who, because he has the money and the time, is instrumental, very important in the production of these exhibitions. His father dies when he's in his late 30s, I think. And here we have a picture of his mother in mourning. Now, this is then the home of, you know, the middle class home of the Caillebotte. Now, what you have here is, I think I contrasted this very much to Renoir's picture of lunch. This is a quiet, sober, rather dark view of the inside of the middle classes. But what is important here are two things. First of all is the absorption of this character here. And we're going to look at a series of his paintings where you look at a figure who is absolutely, totally absorbed in something and ignores the painter and ignores the viewer. If you would remember those other paintings of Marie Antoinette and Napoleon, they were very clearly performing for the viewer. This one ignores us completely. And also the second thing is this use of strange perspective, where we sort of seem to be hovering on it over the table, over this empty plate. Now, whether this is symbolic of the absence of the dead father, or it's this strange cropping, this strange, slightly not unearthly, that's not the word, but it slightly unsettling view of the table. His mother dies, sorry, I was just going to say that René there, who is absorbed, will die 2 years after his father, in his 20s, of an aneurysm. So you have this history of heart problems, aneurysms in the family. And the death of his brother, that's when Gustave makes his first will, leaving all of those paintings that he has amassed to the city of Paris. And 2 years later, his mother will die. Now, she'll die when she's about 56 or something. She looks about 100 here. But what is, again, this idea of a painting of his relatives or of people who are important to him, not commissions, a painting also of someone totally absorbed in the task and ignoring us, the viewer and the painter. And she probably is working here on a pattern that her son Gustave would have drawn for her. He actually designed textiles, he designed knitting patterns. I mean, you name it, Gustave did it. So here again, we have him now when his mother has died and his father's died and his brothers died. He and that last brother, Martial, sell up the mansion at Hyères and sell up the mansion on the Rue Miremenil and buy an apartment on the Boulevard Haussmann. And here he sets up his studio. And here we have one of these paintings that he has in his collection here. There's a sort of man plant over here, you know, which is looking a bit like it needs watering. Here he's sitting with probably a friend on a couch. Now, he has trouble then with the Impressionists. He clashes with Degas. Degas wants to basically, I think it's the sixth, no, it's the fifth, I'm sorry, one of the last Impressionist exhibitions, wants to bring in mainly realist painters such as Raffaelli, and Caillebotte decides he won't participate. And of course, this has been his life, really. He has no children, he hasn't married. And so his brother marries, and he decides that he will sell up in Paris and buys a large block of land opposite, on the banks of the Seine, opposite Argenteuil at Petit-Gennevilliers, and he will come and live here. And then he begins gardening. All right, now he's extremely wealthy, so he can afford to have gardeners. He then becomes interested in the development of his garden, as you know, and swaps seeds with Monet and so on. It's when he's actually in this garden, here it's very much like a Japanese print, that he will die. Now, he also at this time becomes the chairman of the boating society. He becomes the mayor of Petit-Gennevilliers. He designs his own boats. And actually at this stage, no longer really exhibits much in Paris at all. He paints this particular painting of a man coming out of his bath. And this, he wanted to exhibit this in Brussels, where there was an avant-garde group. They found it a little bit shocking because, of course, it's a male nude. People were used to having women getting out of their baths, and a male nude was something which was most unusual. And in fact, they thought there was much too much emphasis on his rosy buttocks, and in fact, what you can see between the buttocks. So again, in many ways, it's typical of his art, where you actually have someone absorbed in a task who actually ignores and does not want to relate to the viewer. All right, and here this person is not looking at anything else except perhaps his feet, but you get the vigorous nature of a man towing himself down. So there's been a huge amount of controversy about this, you know, is this a homoerotic painting and so on. I do want to say that we'll have to discuss this, because you do actually have this rather strange person on the balcony with a person like Caillebotte. What is this man? He's clearly a sort of working class character or upper working class character. What's he doing inside Caillebotte's mansion on the Boulevard Haussmann? So Caillebotte, when he dies, donates his paintings to Paris. The Luxembourg collection don't want to take them. They're Impressionist art, they're not interested. The person who is put in charge of the will is Renoir, who, to his credit, continues to work for Caillebotte, and eventually I think about a third of the paintings are accepted, and they constitute now the core of the collection of the Musée d'Orsay. So we owe Caillebotte a lot. He is buried in Père Lachaise Cemetery. Now, this is a painting, I haven't left myself very much time for this, of the Pont d'Europe, which I showed you is in the 8th arrondissement. And I think is one of the best examples of how Caillebotte foregrounds the city of Paris, and the way in which it is slightly intimidating, and the way in which the paintings are paintings of the city and not really paintings about people any longer. This is the same view if you were standing basically where the painter was. Now, these buildings, this building here you can still see in the painting, and that one there as well. This is something that's been built in front of it. The railings that you had there before were broken during the war. I find it exhilarating standing there, but I think that's just me. Now, what you have here then is an exaggerated perspective, all right? So rather than denying perspective the way the other Impressionists do, where you have everything broken up by light, you have an emphasis, you know, on it. It's not just taking you into another picture space, it's pulling you into the space. And in fact, it's emphasizing what the new city is like. It's about movement, it's about speed. And it focuses on the personage, or the person here, who is Caillebotte, probably Caillebotte himself. Now, he is, of course, the consummate flâneur. It's just like we saw in the paintings that he did of his friends, upper middle class, dynamically walking along. You know, you can see him stepping out, you know, his shadow is shooting along behind him. However, what is his relationship to the woman here in the painting? And this is actually quite crucial because it represents the space of the Second Empire. The city was public space, was a male-dominated space, and the private space was dominated by women, and women were not to be out by themselves unchaperoned. So therefore, if this woman is not with this man, who is she? I mean, she is obviously not a woman up to any good. She would certainly not be walking along this bridge by herself. You could cross the road or something, but normally not. So therefore, this throws into light that poem that we read by Baudelaire, you know, who is this woman that I've just suddenly met? Is she this new type of prostitute which developed in the Second Empire? Men got sick of going to brothels because it was, you know, they wanted to, you know, show how sort of entrepreneurial they were, because this was the new type of man, the new type of bourgeois man who's made it. And so they were sort of how entrepreneurial they were. They could pick up someone else's wife in the street or charm her and so on. So is this what's happening here? So you look actually at the original painting or the sketches, and you can see that they are together. So it's significant that Caillebotte, when he actually finalizes the structure, has them not together. So he's painting very much this casual, momentary connection between people in the new city. You also have the difference between the dynamic middle-class man here and the passive worker. Now, the blues, this is what clearly denotes this man as a worker, and his melon hat, you know, as opposed to this hat here, which identifies him as, you know, upper class. He's crossed, his legs are crossed, he's not moving. He's the opposite of the flâneur. He's what they call a badaud. He's completely absorbed by something. And in fact, he's actually absorbed by the structure of the bridge, which he would have made. You know, he's the workers would have made it. In other words, you have the, you know, working class who construct the city and the middle class who enjoy it. Now, there's a lot of, you know, I've just been reading a book which is trying to put forward the fact that, in fact, Caillebotte is gay, which, you know, really I think is in many ways totally missing the point and is anecdotal. And so is saying that he's not actually looking at this girl at all. He's actually looking at this fellow over here, and that in fact that he's cruising, you know, and he's going up into the 9th arrondissement where there were male brothels and so on. And the person who's putting forward this thesis is that saying that, you know, what's the dog got to do with it? Well, I think that the dog is put in there because it's coming just out of our picture frame and is zooming along, and it's emphasizing this structure of the bridge, of the shadow, of the vanishing point being over here, and the dog is bringing us into this picture frame. Caillebotte also loved dogs, but what the person whose thesis is that this was a dog who was a stray, and that there were edicts which were being brought into Paris at the time where stray dogs were to be eradicated because, you know, they could possibly carry rabies. And then you get this division between working dogs and, you know, dogs that were pets you had to pay for, and, you know, strays like this one. And so this particular thesis is saying, well, this could be a rabid dog, and this could therefore symbolize a medical idea at the time that suppressed sexual desire could give you sort of symptoms which were not unlike rabies. So therefore, the fact that you've actually got a dog which is not recognizable in the screen, in the painting, and the fact that he's not looking at the woman but maybe looking at here, means that really he was, you know, he was cruising and so on. I think the problem with this thesis is that there's many interesting sociological facts, you know, about the dogs and about the position of this and about homosexuality and how it was seen at the time and all of this. But I think that they're sort of missing or not reading the painting as a painting. You also have another figure, working class figure, who is receding, and of course is the opposite again of the Flâneur. He's sort of really sort of slack and sort of moving along. You actually probably have this man who's looking in amazement at these new engines, you know, the new, what were these steam engines? You know, they were something amazing. You know, Zola even writes an entire book about, you know, called La Bête Humaine, you know, the human beast, which, you know, is the story of someone on a railway engine. So this area then is an area which Monet painted many, many times, but was also a middle class area. Now, Caillebotte also does another painting of the Pont du Robe, where he foregrounds the massive structure of the bridge, this new Paris, you know, where engineering and technology and structure right across into the distance, with the smoke and the train over here, is being looked at by this man. And so again, we get the spectator, you know, who is not aware of us. In fact, no one is here. You get the dynamism of the middle class man moving out of the picture plane. You get the passivity of the worker. And again, this person with this thesis sort of thinks again that he's not looking really at anything. He's paused because he's probably going to sort of maybe make a move against this person here. Now, I just want to go a little bit over time looking at the public and private spaces with this idea of the gaze. Now, a number of Caillebotte's paintings are of people at the borderline between the public and the private. So here you have the private, which is the Haussmannian interior, with a very marked barrier made of stone into the public space. And this man here is just, you know, is a kind of spectator at the, you know, liminal spectator. Now, what you have here is this concentration, this absorption of the man here. We can't see him. We don't know his emotions. We don't really even know who he is. In fact, it was his brother who I think died a few months after this was painted. This is Flâneur. We actually are sort of looking at him, and he is looking at her, and she doesn't know that he's looking at him or that we're looking at him. All right, so you have this continuation of this gaze into this rather inhuman, not a lunarscape, but a very Haussmannian built-up space, which isn't really teeming with life. It's a space which is empty and seems to go on forever in a kind of, not exactly a nightmare, but in a strange sort of way that seems infinite. Now, this is a space, of course, which is dominated, again, clearly, by the middle class. Here we have this fellow very jauntily owning Paris in many ways, looking out against these Haussmannian buildings that go on together, against, you know, clearly inside this structure, but dominating the outside. Now, I just wanted to look at the experience of the male gazer or spectator and the female spectator. So again, you're getting this very much this idea of the way in which we creep up on people as they're looking at something else, you know. So in many ways, the psychology of the city and the experience is being thrown onto us because we don't know what this person is experiencing, right? So we become the spectator. And she here is in an interior, and you see the barrier between the public and the private space is even higher. And she's not looking out. She's actually framed very much by curtains, which are very much keeping her in the interior space, in the inner space of the female sphere, whereas the male was leaning over into the outside world. Now she's looking out, but she's looking out into another window, and in fact it's probably another woman looking back at her. So even though she has a room with a view, it's a view that reflects her life in the inner sphere. She's sitting here with a rather sort of, unromantic looking character who's totally absorbed in his newspaper. And he, of course, is also framing her space as well. In many ways, it's a painting of utter boredom, of what the middle-class marriage was like. She is doing nothing. Women, really, the middle-class woman wasn't supposed to have any function really, except to show off wealth and to produce a couple of children, I suppose. And he is showing that he's idle, a middle-class man who doesn't have to work for his living. But this was a scene that would be very familiar to Caillebotte. Now, again, I just want to now sort of go through several of these images, which contrast very much with that, with, again, looking out over this boulevard, which now is shown on this extraordinary slant. So these perspectives, odd perspectives, are now going to dominate his work. Now, his brother, Martial, apart from being interested in music and composing, became very interested in photography. And there was an exhibition in Paris recently where the paintings of Gustave and the photos of Martial were put side by side. And it was suggested in many ways that Gustave was inspired by photographic images. And in fact, it is, chronologically the other way around. Martial, the younger brother, styles his photographs on his brother's paintings. And you can see where we are here. We're in the Rue Scribe. He buys a house there. So they're always in that little block. If you actually get out a map of Paris, they're always moving within a couple of blocks of each other. This is the opera here. And this is the view from where the Caillebotte lived in the Boulevard Haussmann. Now, the perspectives now have changed. This is slightly later than the ones that we were looking at, the Pont d'Europe and the Paris on a rainy day. And you have a slightly stomach-lurching plunge over the balcony into this city, where you get light and you get movement, and it's the modern city. You've got pavements and you've got light, and it goes on into infinity. But it is like a labyrinth, as you can see, of buildings which are all the same, and the inhabitants of the city are totally dwarfed by the infrastructure which has been put into place to glorify the Second Empire. So it is a painting of the city and the experience of the city. And the last ones that I want to look at here are paintings again from his balcony, and of really incredibly sort of anonymous parts of the city. However, it is immediately identifiable as the Haussmannian city of Paris in about the 1870s or the 1880s. The boulevards now were so wide you couldn't cross them in one lot of what would now be traffic lights, and so you needed what they call refuges in the centre. So you get this sense of geometry again. So you've got looking down, so that the circle becomes a kind of oval. You have the lampposts straight up, and then you have people who look like lampposts themselves. So the city has in many ways dehumanized people so that they have become part of the architecture, part of the infrastructure. And the ones who aren't just standing still are sort of lost in this enormous new city. Now, this one over here is even more interesting. This possibly owes more to Japanese prints, where the perspective is really strange. So he's looking right down on the tree, which is foreshortened, and it's not why has he done a tree? Well, the trees were an important part of the infrastructure. On the boulevards, you had to have trees, and they had to be at a certain number of meters apart. They all had to have this round part around them, and they were always cut off at the second floor so that you could see the lights coming out of the main windows of the Haussmannian building. So at night, the city was lit up, hence the city of light. So in other words, this is very much part, it's not just nature and, you know, nice cherry blossoms or anything, it's part of this restrictive structure of the city with the street furniture here. And again, people seen not as people, but as sort of part of the city, black people moving along, sort of, you know, people whom you can't identify. This is a photograph taken by Martial after the death of his brother, showing the same sort of angle. Here you have the refuge in the center, but the people again by the angle have been reduced to verticals. This person here is looking a little bit more dynamic, but here of course is more interest insofar as you have the new forms of transport. I want to finish with this photograph, which I really do love, which is taken of Gustave by Martial. It's Gustave near the Place du Carrousel, outside the Louvre, walking across these cobblestones with his dog, Bergère. He loved animals. There's a number of photographs of him with different dogs, and I love the look between these two. You have the sort of same figures as ever. However, you actually, in this photograph, you have what you don't really have in the cityscapes of Gustave. You actually have an identifiable person. But I think this is a kind of homage of Martial to Gustave, to Paris on a rainy day, with the mist and the emphasis on the cobblestones coming into our foreground, and also reminiscent of those paintings by photographs by Marville of the Paris which has disappeared. So I hope with this discussion we have established that Caillebotte has a unique vision amongst the Impressionists of the new city of Paris. It's not about frivolity, it's not just about light, it's about modernity itself, of speed, of change, ambiguous encounters, the anonymity of the new city. Thank you very much.